You know, if I were to tell you that there's one particular ability that awakened people possess which absolutely terrifies ordinary consciousness, you might expect me to say something about supernatural powers or mystical visions or the ability to read minds, but it's nothing of the sort. It's something far more radical, far more threatening to the established order of things, and yet so simple that when I tell you what it is, you might be surprised that it causes such consternation. The ability I'm speaking of is this: awakened people have the capacity to see things as they are, without the overlay of thought, without the constant interference of mental commentary, without the desperate need to label, categorize, judge, and interpret everything according to their psychological needs and fears. Now, let me elaborate on this because it sounds rather innocent when put that way, doesn't it? Oh, they see things as they are. How lovely. But you must understand what this really means and why it's so profoundly disturbing to those who haven't developed this capacity. You see, most people don't see reality at all. They see their thoughts about reality. They see their beliefs, their conditioning, their fears, their desires, their past experiences, all projected onto the present moment. They're looking at the world through a thick fog of mental constructs, and they mistake this fog for the world itself. Let me give you an example. You meet someone at a social gathering, and within moments your mind has catalogued them. This person is successful, you think, noticing their expensive clothing. Or, this person is attractive, you think, responding to their physical features. Or, this person is boring, you think, based on the first few words they speak. And from that moment on, you don't actually see or hear that person anymore. You see and hear your concept of them, your judgment of them, your story about them. The awakened person, on the other hand, meets that same individual and remains open, receptive, without immediately filing them away into some mental category. They see the person directly, without the filter of judgment. And this creates a very different kind of encounter, a very different quality of relationship. The person being seen in this way often finds it quite unsettling because they're accustomed to being judged, to being immediately categorized and dismissed, and suddenly they're being truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. But this ability extends far beyond personal relationships. The awakened person looks at political situations, social arrangements, religious institutions, economic systems, all the structures that society takes for granted, and they see them without the usual assumptions, without the inherited beliefs about how things must be or should be. They see the naked reality of what's actually happening, stripped of all the justifications and rationalizations that keep those structures in place. And this is where it becomes threatening, because every social structure, every institution, every system of power depends absolutely on people not seeing clearly, on people accepting certain fictions as facts, on people agreeing to hallucinate together in very specific ways. Take money, for instance. Money is nothing but paper, or nowadays, numbers in a computer. It has no intrinsic value whatsoever, but we've all agreed to believe that it does, and that collective belief creates a reality. The awakened person sees this. They see that money is a game we're playing, a very useful game perhaps, but a game nonetheless. And when you see it as a game, you can't quite take it as seriously as those who believe it's real. You can play the game, you may even play it very well, but you're not hypnotized by it. You don't worship it. You don't sacrifice your life, your health, your relationships on its altar. The same applies to national boundaries. Lines on a map, agreed upon fictions that we defend with armies and wars. The awakened person sees a human being, not a nationality. They see the earth, not countries. And this makes them dangerous to the nationalist, to the patriot who has built their entire identity around the idea that their country is special, superior, worth dying for, or consider religious doctrines. Every religion claims to have the truth, the way, the light, but the awakened person looks at these claims and sees human beings trying to capture the infinite in words, trying to contain the mystery in concepts, trying to own the divine. They see the poetry of it, the beauty of it, but they also see the limitation of it. The way these doctrines divide humanity into believers and non-believers, saved and damned, us and them. Now, when you have this ability to see through the collective hallucinations that hold society together, you become a threat. Not because you're trying to destroy anything, not because you're rebellious or malicious, but simply because your clear seeing reveals to others that they're not seeing clearly. Your very presence, your very way of being in the world, exposes the emperor's nakedness. And people don't want this exposure. They've invested everything in these collective fictions. Their identity, their security, their sense of meaning and purpose. All of it rests on certain beliefs being true, certain structures being permanent, certain values being absolute. When someone comes along who sees that none of it is absolute, that it's all relative, all constructed, all arbitrary, this is experienced as an attack, even when no attack is intended. Let me go deeper into what this seeing entails. The awakened person has somehow managed to create a space between stimulus and response. Something happens, and there's a moment, perhaps just a fraction of a second, but it's there before the conditioned reaction occurs. In that space, there's awareness, there's choice, there's freedom. For most people, there is no such space. Something happens, and they react immediately, automatically, according to their conditioning. Someone insults them, and they become angry. Someone praises them, and they become pleased. They're like machines, responding predictably to inputs, controlled by their programming. And they don't even realize it because it all happens so quickly, so automatically. But the awakened person has learned to pause, to observe, to see the reaction arising without immediately acting on it. They see their anger arising, but they are not the anger. They see their fear arising, but they are not the fear. They are the awareness in which these emotions appear, and from that position of awareness, they have a choice about how to respond. This ability to not be controlled by one's emotions, one's thoughts, one's conditioning, this is enormously threatening to others because it means you can't be manipulated in the usual ways. The politician who tries to inflame your tribal loyalty finds that it doesn't stick. The advertiser who tries to make you feel inadequate so you'll buy their product discovers that you're immune. The religious leader who tries to control you through guilt and fear finds no purchase in your psyche. You become like water, flowing around obstacles rather than crashing against them. You become unpredictable, not in a chaotic way, but in the sense that you're not following the script everyone else is following. You're responding to each moment freshly, directly, rather than according to some predetermined pattern. And this unpredictability, this freedom, is terrifying to the control systems of society. Every institution, educational, religious, political, economic, depends on people being predictable, on people following the rules, on people staying within certain boundaries of acceptable thought and behavior. When someone demonstrates that these boundaries are arbitrary, that the rules are optional, that another way of being is possible, this threatens the entire system. But here's what's really fascinating. The awakened person isn't trying to threaten anyone or anything. They're not revolutionaries in the conventional sense. They're not trying to overthrow governments or tear down institutions. In fact, they're often quite peaceful, quite content, quite comfortable with things as they are. But their very being, their very existence, is revolutionary because it demonstrates a freedom that others don't believe is possible. Think about what happens when you're around someone who is genuinely free, who isn't playing the game of accumulation and achievement, who isn't anxious about the future or regretful about the past, who isn't trying to prove anything or become anything. At first, you might feel relieved, refreshed, as if you've been given permission to relax, to stop pretending, to just be. But then something else happens. You start to feel uncomfortable. You start to feel judged. Even though they're not judging you, you start to feel that your own anxiety, your own striving, your own endless mental chatter is somehow inadequate, somehow wrong. This discomfort arises because their presence reveals your prison to you. They're not trying to show you that you're in prison, they're not thinking about you at all in that way. But simply by being free themselves, they illuminate your lack of freedom. and this is unbearable for most people. It's easier to dismiss them as impractical, naive, irresponsible, or even crazy than to face the possibility that you've been living in a cage of your own making. The awakened person also has the ability to be with discomfort, with uncertainty, with not knowing. This is perhaps the most unnerving aspect of their presence. Most people are desperately trying to achieve certainty, to know, to have all the answers. They cling to their beliefs, their ideologies, their certainties like a drowning person clings to a piece of driftwood. They cannot tolerate ambiguity, paradox, mystery. But the awakened person has made friends with uncertainty. They've realized that not knowing is actually more honest than the false certainty that most people carry around. They've discovered that in the space of not knowing, there's an aliveness, an openness, a possibility that's impossible when you think you've got it all figured out. When you encounter such a person, when you try to engage them in the usual debates about politics or religion or philosophy, you find that they don't take positions in the way you expect. They don't defend one side against another. They can see truth in multiple perspectives. They can hold contradictions without needing to resolve them. And this is maddening to those who need the world to be black and white, who need clear enemies and allies, who need simple answers to complex questions. I remember once having a conversation with a man who was very invested in a particular political ideology. He wanted me to agree with him, to validate his views, to join his team. But when I pointed out some valid concerns from the opposing viewpoint, he became quite agitated. "Whose side are you on?" he demanded. And when I said I wasn't on anyone's side, that I was simply trying to see the whole picture, he looked at me as if I were betraying some sacred trust. To him, my refusal to take a partisan position was cowardice or moral weakness. But from my perspective, taking such a position would have been a limitation, a closing off of understanding, a refusal to see the complexity of the situation. This ability to see multiple perspectives simultaneously, to hold paradox, to embrace complexity and ambiguity, this is what the awakened consciousness developed. And it's threatening because it dissolves the clear-cut divisions that society depends on. It makes alliance building difficult. It makes propaganda ineffective. It makes ideological warfare impossible. The awakened person can't be recruited into your cause because they see that your cause and the opposing cause are both partial truths, both limited perspectives, both missing something essential. This doesn't make them apathetic or uninvolved. They may work passionately for certain changes in the world, but they do so without the fanaticism, without the certainty that their side has all the answers and the other side is pure evil. Another aspect of this clear seeing is the ability to perceive people's motivations, often unconscious motivations that they themselves don't recognize. The awakened person has done enough inner work, has observed their own mind sufficiently that they can see through the various masks and personas that people wear. They can sense when someone is speaking from fear, from desire for approval, from insecurity, from a need to control. This doesn't mean they're cynical or judgmental about it. In fact, they usually have great compassion because they understand that these behaviors come from suffering, from not knowing one's true nature. But they can't be fooled by the performance. They see through the charm, the charisma, the carefully crafted image to the frightened ego beneath. And again, this is threatening because most of human interaction is based on these performances, these masks. We're all playing roles, projecting images, trying to control how others perceive us. When someone comes along who sees through all of that, who perceives the reality beneath the facade, it's like being suddenly naked. There's nowhere to hide, no way to manipulate or control their perception of you. Business leaders, politicians, religious authorities, anyone whose power depends on crafting a certain image, find awakened people very difficult to deal with. They can't be impressed by credentials or intimidated by authority. They can't be seduced by flattery or manipulated by guilt. They see the human being behind the role, and they relate to that human being, not to the position they hold or the image they're projecting. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This ability to see clearly doesn't make awakened people perfect or infallible. They can still make mistakes. They can still have blind spots. They can still be limited by their own conditioning in various ways. What distinguishes them is not that they're beyond all limitation, but that they're aware of their limitations. They don't pretend to know what they don't know. They don't claim certainties they don't possess. And paradoxically, this humility, this honest acknowledgement of not knowing, often makes them appear more wise, more trustworthy than those who claim to have all the answers. People sense that they're getting something real, something authentic, rather than a polished performance or a rehearsed ideology. But here's the deepest reason why this ability to see clearly is so frightening. It reveals that we are responsible for our own experience of reality. The awakened person demonstrates that suffering is optional, that anxiety is a choice, that the prison we're in has no walls except the ones we've imagined into existence. Most people desperately need to believe that their suffering is caused by external circumstances, by other people, by society, by the past, by bad luck. This belief allows them to feel like victims, which is painful but also comforting in a way, because it means they're not responsible. They couldn't have done anything differently. But the awakened person, through their very being, suggests something else. They suggest that regardless of circumstances, regardless of what's happened or what's happening, there's a way of relating to it that doesn't create suffering. Not that pain disappears, pain is part of life, but suffering, which is the mental anguish we add to pain through our resistance and our stories, this can cease. And if that's true, if suffering really is optional, then what excuse do you have for continuing to suffer? The awakened person's freedom indirectly poses this question, and it's a question most people don't want to face, because answering it would require changing everything about how they live, how they think, how they relate to experience. So you see, this one ability to see things as they are, without the overlay of conditioning, judgment, and mental constructs, is not some minor parlor trick or interesting skill. It's a fundamental shift in consciousness that threatens every structure of society, every pattern of control, every comfortable illusion we've constructed. The awakened person becomes a mirror in which others can see their own bondage, their own confusion, their own refusal to look directly at reality. And mirrors are dangerous things, because once you've truly seen yourself, once you've glimpsed the truth, you can never quite go back to the old comfortable lies. This is why, throughout history, the truly awakened have often been killed, imprisoned, marginalized, or dismissed. Not because they were violent or dangerous in any conventional sense, but because their clear seeing threatened to wake others up, to disturb the collective dream, to expose the arbitrary nature of all the structures we take to be solid and real. And yet, paradoxically, these same awakened beings are also revered, celebrated, turned into saints and sages after they're safely dead, and their teachings have been domesticated. We build monuments to them while ignoring what they actually said, what they actually demonstrated. We worship their memory while persecuting anyone who embodies that same clarity of seeing in the present moment. So if you find yourself developing this ability, if you find yourself seeing through the collective hallucinations that others still believe in, understand that you're entering dangerous territory. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because clear seeing is inherently threatening to those who prefer comfortable delusion. Be gentle, be compassionate, be wise about when to speak and when to remain silent. But don't betray what you've seen. Don't pretend to be blind just to make others comfortable. The world needs those who can see, now more than ever.